to now doing what you're doing? Like, why breathwork specifically as well? Like, what was your call to adventure?
That's actually a really long story, so I'll try and condense it a bit.
Keep it as long as you like. There's long form content.
And I've only ever really told this story once, I think, and I told it at. I'll make this a bit longer, I suppose, because I had half an hour. I told it at Love Jam. My real call to adventure, I suppose, was in the beginning basketball. So I was a bit of a black sheep of my family. We loved computer games. That's all we did. I suppose my original adventure would be computer games. My mum loved Lord of the Rings and that type of thing. So we'd always play Dungeons and Dragons games. And for me, adventure was on a screen, right? So read books and play computer games. That was the original, I suppose, where it started. And then I got into basketball, which is very physical. And I happened to be really good at it. So I got offered to go to the States. I had 2 full sports scholarships to go to the States, one to Tennessee King's Academy and one to Boston University. I took the first one, but it got turned down last minute because I'd been out of school for too long, and I turned the second one down. During that time, I moved to Swansea because I was living in somewhere near Chepstow, and I became the captain of one of the first academies in the UK for basketball. So it was an amazing adventure for me at the time, just moving to here, living on my own, had everything paid for, food, accommodation. It was kind of, I suppose to a degree, semi-professional type setup. And during that time started running bars and nightclubs once I'd started leaving basketball. And then 2008, my dad died, and it was a strange time because he died a week before my first niece was born. And although I wasn't close to my dad, in fact I didn't really like him, I couldn't fathom the fact that he was in my life the whole time and died a week before Ruby was born, which meant that the moment she came into the world, she couldn't understand who he was. He will be a picture to her forever. And that, I still can't understand that he was a big part of my life. And to her, which is a natural thing, he's just a photo. And that made me realise I needed to do something more with my life. I wanted more of a legacy. I wanted to leave more. I wanted to have more people understand who I was, what I was about, and what I was capable of, I suppose. So I joined the Marines, started that process in 2008, literally the moment my dad died, started running. And at the time, of course, I was super fit in basketball. For me, a warm-up for me was put the running machine on full blast and just go for 10, 15, 20 minutes. That was a warm-up for the gym. But when I started to join the Marines, I was 17 stone, because I'd just been lifting weights, just all muscle, could barely run a mile. And of course I joined the Marines and ended up going out to Afghan. And I suppose cutting this short a little bit, I'm sure you can imagine what it's like in the Marines. It's very physical. It's very, I suppose, it's all action-based, right? Is the things we do make things happen in the world. There's nothing spiritual in there. There's nothing esoteric or weird. However, I was the guy that you call the point man or a Valen man. So I was in Afghan. I was the guy at the front of every patrol. I had a metal detector, which every step I'd wave in front, looking for IEDs, looking for mines. So I'd be the guy into every building first, out of every building first, right at the front, the most visible person, the most likely to get blown up, the most likely to get shot. And I suppose that original call to adventure for me was to go and fight for what I believed our country was and what we had and what we'd created over time with all the propaganda on the news about Iraq and Afghan and all these different things. Height of the Afghan war. But what that did for me was you have to concentrate so hard during this time of waving a Valen in front of you and looking for essentially what you call sign, is that you become extremely conscious and extremely present to the point where it's beyond, to me at least, it was beyond a spiritual experience. So much so that my equipment I'd put down, I'd strap it to my back, I'd turn it off. I could read the ground, read people better than the Valen, the metal detector, could tell me what was going on. And again, so much so I've only told this story once, I suppose, because it feels a bit embarrassing to say this type of stuff in front of Marines, because they'd be like, oh, whatever, that's ridiculous. But we'd walk into areas and I would feel the air change. It was almost like Matrix, like you could read things that were going on. I'd know we were about to get shot at. I'd know something was about to happen. And I even had a dream once before we went out on patrol, where I saw a guy, and it was like an angel. He was a typical Afghan guy. I could see every hair in his beard. He had his big blue eyes. I could see every wrinkle on his face. And he walked up to me in this dream and handed me a present. It was like this shiny, obvious present, right, with a big bow around it, and handed it to me. And as soon as I touched it, I woke up. And out there, you never actually see the enemy, ever. And mainly because they looked like everyone else. This was towards the end of the war, really. And they were just paying farmers to pick up weapons and fire at people. So I knew there was something about that dream. And on the way back, we'd just been shot at. We just kind of escaped from this contact. And as we were walking back, I turned to my right for, almost like felt called to. As I turned to my right, seeing through the bush, kind of over a wadi, which is a dry river, I saw a guy jumping off the back of a motorbike with a long-barrelled weapon under his clothing. And it was the guy in my dream. It was same clothing, same colour beard. You know, there's multiple different versions you could have, you know, maybe a black waistcoat, brown dish dash or whatever. And it was the guy in my dream. And it was the only time I saw the enemy. I think only time any of us saw the enemy. But of course I pointed out and we all fired in that direction and got out of there. So I believe that saved our lives. And it's hard to say, right? I can say that because I had the dream and saw the guy and these things. Perhaps it didn't, but it felt like something more at the time. And that kind of opened up this spiritual idea for me that there was something more than just physical. Didn't really tell anyone about that because it sounds crazy. And fast forward about 6-7 years, I left the Marines. I started my own private investigation company. And I was doing a job somewhere near London-ish. And I decided to do some yoga, right, because it was kind of a stressful job at the time. And at the end of that, there was some real slow breath work, very much like we were talking about just now, that type of breath work, you know, 4 in, 4 out, very slow. I just had this out-of-body experience. My body disappeared, time disappeared. I felt that cheesy spiritual thing of infinite oneness and love and connection to everything and source, and it just blew my head off. It was for a moment. And when the yoga teacher said sit up and open your eyes, when I opened my eyes I jumped because I was in a room of physical people. In my mind and wherever I was just somewhere else where I felt like I was consciousness or spirit or whatever that thing is. I don't even know how to explain it, but that it kind of blew me back so much that I had to figure out what happened and went to learn more breath work. And still not ready to tell this story, but I had a crazier experience in the next breath work I did. Tried to explain to some people I know and nobody understood it, and I still don't think they would. So I went down the path of learning how to show people how it feels rather than explain it, because there aren't words for the things that happen in some of these breathwork practices. And now after about 6 or 7 certifications and trainings and kind of traveling the world to do it for people and meet people and doing it for probably thousands of people by now, I'm kind of here, gone right through that whole basketball, nightclub, marine, physical, I suppose, adventure, and I've ended up in this place where it's the complete opposite. And I suppose the last part of that story is as I started getting into breath work, in the Marines you wear a green beret, you dress a certain way, you walk a certain way, you talk a certain way, and you are part of something bigger than you. So when I started the whole breathwork side of things, I thought, I'm gonna have to wear white cotton and, you know, maybe somehow get long hair and not that I could, but, you know, beads and bangles and all that kind of stuff. Like, I've got to be spiritual, otherwise nobody will accept me. It'll be ridiculous me taking people on these spiritual journeys if I look like this and I've got a shaved head and talk the way I do. And it's obvious I was in the military, so I had a struggle with myself about who I was and what I was capable of. But what ended up happening really is the more authentic I became to just be me, the more people were attracted to me to do the breath work, knowing that I'm being me and I'm just the average person. So I never present this as a spiritual practice. I never tell people what they could or should feel. I'm just me, and I open the space up, and I've had people drive 6-7 hours that are rugby players or builders or steel workers, miners, those types of people, big, burly, strong men, because I do it and I'm a Marine and they've seen me do it. I know they wouldn't go into a yurt and do it with some guy with dreadlocks and walk around with a stick, but they're happy to do it with me because they get a connection. And I suppose that's where I am now, is trying to connect with and hit as many people as possible that are just your average person. That breathwork isn't for your spiritual types or your enlightened types, or most of the practitioners you'll see online are often posh London types with a background of maybe money, because perhaps they've got the time to do the spiritual stuff. A lot of the famous people in the UK are those people. And I think then the average person from people like where I came from think it's out of reach, and it's not. It's their breath. It's your breath. You own it. You can do it whenever you like, and it's free. So that's me and how I got here.
That is quite an incredible journey. Like you said, you started off like gaming, then basketball. That's already a big transition. Basketball to military, a big transition, and then military to breathwork. It's like a 180 again. But that's what the Call to Adventure is all about, right? It takes you on this journey. It takes you from being one person through this whole experience to become someone else. Sometimes it's hard to see when it initially like opens up to you. And that's why I love the expression, the Call to Adventure, and its roots in like storytelling and stuff, because there's so many characters in these movies or books or whatever it may be, where there's that person that doesn't answer the call. And it might keep ringing, it might ring like every now and then, or it might be a one-time opportunity that they've missed. And I think that's so representative of life. And it's like you get all these opportunities, and this small thing might change your life completely, but you're not ever going to see it in the moment. It's always something like we're doing now, where we're reflecting back, and it's like, wow, like that was the moment that's then led me to here. I find it fascinating. What I really liked from what you were saying about breathwork, though, was how it's achievable for everyone. Because, like, I always think out of all the systems in your body, your breathwork that's the one thing you can control. Like, I can't control my heart rate by thinking about it. I can't control like all the different like digestion systems and all of my lymph nodes and things like that, but I can control my breathing. Like the effect that it can have, from what I understand, is massive, but obviously you're the expert, so now I'm going to ask, like, what differences can you make in your life just from controlling your breathing?
So where you'd said there's certain things you can't control by thought. You can't control your heart rate, you can't control your lymph nodes, but you can control your breath. The breath controls all of those things. So it's almost the doorway into controlling the rest of the body. If you've ever noticed, if you stepped out into a street and a car's tried to whiz past and you've almost got hit, you'll almost jump in, or you'll go in cold water and you'll change your breath. Or if you sit down at the end of the week, the moment your bum hits the sofa, you'll go, you'll make that sound and your breath changes. And the reason is because the way you breathe dictates what happens in the body. It changes your hormones, it changes your temperature, it changes the way you digest, it changes the way you see, even, everything. So if there's any bodily function you can think of, you can breathe in certain ways to change that, to turn it up, to turn it down. And it's just about practicing. So when people say, for example, what breath work should I do? It's a super simple question, because it's all good. But it depends what the outcome is. It's almost saying, what should I do in the gym? It's like, just turn up first. Yeah. But it depends what you want. So, you can raise the heart rate if a person's cold, or if they want a bit of energy. Some people call that coffee breath. You can bring it down and slow the heart rate down if you want to calm down and maybe focus a little bit more. You can turn the focus up so that you can concentrate a lot more. Box breath and breathing was used by the Navy SEALs before they go into combat quite often. You can change your digestion so that if you're about to eat, you can turn the digestion system on so that you can digest your food properly, make sure you don't put loads of weight on, and allow the food to move through the body properly. There's barely a thing you can think of that you want from your body that the breath doesn't start.
Yeah. So where would people get started with doing breathing practices then? I know like that's such a broad question, and like you was just saying, it depends what they want to get out of it. Yeah. But for a lot of people, like me included in this, because I've tried to get into breathwork and you just don't know where to start, because you're like, well, there's like the Wim Hof method, there's box breathing, there's like I've read a few books about breathing, and it's like, oh, well, really you need to be breathing in for 6 seconds and out for 8 seconds, and it's just like there's so much out there. It's like, where do I begin?
Yeah, it's do you know, I believe that's one of the biggest problems right now is we're in the information age and everyone's confused about everything. The best place to start with anything is consciousness of the thing, right? So if you asked what do I do about my food, so pay attention to what you're eating first. If you want to move more or exercise, pay attention to how you move, how much you move, how fast you move, how it feels when you move. And it's the same when you breathe. So if you want to start anything or any type of breath work at all, it's just to pay attention to how you breathe. Because once you do, you'll notice anomalies because you know how to breathe inside. Your body knows what it should be doing. And so the best place to start is just consciousness of breath. And to figure out, sometimes people will say, I hold my breath a lot, why is that? Or, sometimes I breathe through the mouth or through my nose, and sometimes I'll yawn too much, or whatever those things are. If people want to take a journal, or they want to just mentally figure out how they're breathing by paying more attention, it's honestly the best place to start, because people will have a rough idea what to do. And then after that, the next most simple thing is switch all breathing to nasal breathing. That can change people's lives so much from just the most simple thing is, so pay attention and breathe through the nose. It's super easy and will change somebody's life.
Yeah. I've got so many questions off the back of that still. But because you just brought up nasal breathing then, that was going to be one of them. Like, how important is nasal breathing? Because for me, I've always just nasal breathed. Like, I've never really been a mouth breather. And I notice it because when, like, I've got a blocked nose if I'm ill, I wake up with, like, the worst throat ever. And I'm like, oh, my nose is blocked, like I'm ill, because I've woken up feeling like that. And it took me years to realise, like, that's what caused it, was, like, the fact that I've got a blocked nose, because I've never consciously done it. But from reading, I can't even remember what book it is, so I'll probably put it in the link somewhere. But it was like, yeah, like, this is how most people feel every morning because they breathe through their mouth. And I'm just like, oh, like, is it not normal to breathe through your nose? Apparently it's not for most people, but like, how important is it really?
Your mouth's not designed for breathing. So I suppose it's like using a spanner to hammer a nail, right? It's just the wrong tool. So it'll get done, but it won't end well. So there's so many things that happen when you breathe. It's basically a gas exchange. That's what you want. You want to have balanced gases in the body. And very similar to the way you eat, if you're doing certain things in life, maybe if you've upped your energy expenditure, you want the gases to match what's going on in your body most of the time. So you want CO2 in the body at certain times. You want more oxygen in the blood at certain times. But when you breathe through the nose, the main things really that happen is you've got, of course, hairs up the nose that filter a lot of the breath. You have pathways that run down the nasal cavity that create nitric oxide. Nitric oxide pools in the nasal cavity, which opens up all the blood pathways to stop inflammation. It's got antioxidants in the gas. It's antioxidants, anti-inflammatory properties. So what that means is that just by breathing through the nose, people can lose weight, they can stop pain in their body, they can stave off illness, they can sleep better. And the worst thing about it is when you start to breathe through the mouth, because you can start to get inflammation because you're not breathing through the nose, that starts a process of inflammation which can inflame the nose to stop you breathing through the nose, so you breathe more through the mouth, and it becomes this crazy cycle. And what you'll often see from people is they might get sick, for example, let's say on a Monday, right? And they think, oh, I've caught something. Now, I don't know where people get that idea from. They've caught an illness because they can't prove it. They don't know who had it, but they feel ill, so they decided they've caught it off somebody. What they're not doing probably is looking back to any other physiological things that could have happened. Perhaps did they drink on a Friday night? Potentially. Drinking on the Friday may have caused inflammation and made them sleep bad. On the Friday night, they went to bed late, so they snored the whole night, mouth breathing, so they get more inflammation, so they feel worse in the morning. They spend the whole night potentially breathing bacteria through their mouth. Then they wake up the next day and feel bad, so they have a McDonald's, right? And then because there's more inflammation, so they continue to breathe through their mouth and start to breathe in all the rest of the bad bacteria over the weekend. And by Monday, this knock-on effect of potentially causing dysfunctional breathing from drinking maybe on a Friday has lasted the whole weekend, and that's allowed them to continue to breathe in terrible bacteria, not get rid of inflammation through breathing incorrectly, to keep the heart rate elevated the whole time, to keep the body in a fight or flight stress mode because they're not breathing through the nose correctly. So they spend from Friday afternoon until Monday morning in a total fight or flight state, and then become ill, and they blame it on catching a cold. So it's that important that it could always be that one bit of a knock-on effect to the next thing that causes a problem that nobody's paying attention to.
Yeah. With nasal breathing as well then, because I follow, is it Jacko? Have you heard of him? Yeah. Does all the breathwork stuff, the mouth taping, ex-rugby player, and he's on about like how you should only, pretty much like when you're training, you should only do nasal breathing. But like I've tried it and that's hard. So does that still apply during sports and sports performance, or is that a different kettle of fish?
So kind of both, right? So let's say you should only ever deadlift with a straight back, right? Ever. And a person tries to break a world record. Now, if they try and go above what they've usually done and what they're usually used to, their back might round a little bit, and they'll still move the weight and still get it up, and the record gets broken because the weight still works from the ground to the hips, and they break the record, right? So the task gets done, but they do it suboptimally for the way it should be done. The breath is kind of the same. So yes, we should always breathe through the nose, ideally, because of the function of the nose and what it does. However, sometimes if you're not used to it, you've got poor CO2 tolerance, or maybe you're not fit enough or not used to it. And the fitter you are and more used to it you are, the higher up your tolerance you can go. So for example, ideally, most people should be able to breathe to about 90% through their nose of their actual capacity before they start to sprint, and that, it becomes a mouth breathing exercise. Once you start to reach your top end of what your tolerances are through nasal breathing, people will switch to the mouth because they're trying to dump extra carbon dioxide. They're trying to breathe more air into the lungs, and it goes to the mouth through like almost like a panic gas exchange thing. That's not optimal. To a degree, we shouldn't do it that way. But if you do, it needs to be done for a short amount of time to bounce the gases back and then switch back to the nose. It shouldn't just stay as a mouth breathing exercise. Some people look at it as like gears. So you should go nose in, nose out, ideally. And then, of course, the breath starts to move up and get faster and deeper. And then it should go nose in, mouth out. And then, for example, mouth in, mouth out. And then that's shifting up gears if you absolutely need to. Then on the way back down, it goes from mouth in, mouth out to nose in, mouth out. And then nose in, nose out, ideally. But again, you need to pay attention to what you need and how you feel. So, for example, if you're going for a run and you start to feel this, in fact, this is a good test for you. Next time you go for a run, you start to get to your top end. Feel how your breath is at that threshold amount. And when you start to feel out of breath, you can tell if it's an oxygen issue or a carbon dioxide issue by doing one of two things. One is either sucking a ton of air. If sucking a ton of air for a couple of breaths makes you feel better, it's an oxygen issue. If you blow out a lot of air and you do that a couple of times to dump carbon dioxide, it's a carbon dioxide issue. So that's where you can usually tell what's going on with the gases.
Okay.
But if you absolutely could, it should always be nose. But again, it depends on the outcome. The one thing that you might want to do, that some people can do if they want to train this way, is to only ever train up to nasal capacity and then move nasal capacity forward. So if you can run a certain speed, a certain length of time, certain distance, doing nose-mouth, make sure you only do what can be done through the nose to make sure the nasal breathing improves over time, and don't go over and above that.
Yeah.
That will improve the nasal capacity over time.
Okay. What then would be the subsequent performance gain from doing that? Because like from what we've described, it is just, you're saying this is how you improve your nasal capacity. But what would be the benefits of doing that if you naturally find, like, you say it's like nose in, mouth out, or even mouth in, mouth out, and you're like, well, I can push myself harder at this rate. Like, say I'm doing like a 10k, I could do like a sub-hour 10k doing like mouth breathing, but if I'm doing nasal breathing, I have to slow it right down to like hour 10, hour 20.
Yeah.
Like, what are the benefits of then being like, right, I'm gonna just push my nasal capacity up?
Sure. So it's very similar to, not a big golf fan, so excuse me if I get this wrong. At one point, Tiger Woods was the world champion. And one of the things he did was he started to lose a bit more often. So he got up to his maximum capacity as a golfer with the current swing he had. He had to then go back to the drawing board, change his swing to ensure his swing got better, which made him worse for a little while. But he trained at that type of golf swing and then improved even further and became champion again. It's a real rudimentary version of that story, right? 'Cause I know nothing about golf. But it's similar. So the idea being that when you breathe through the nose and you breathe correctly through the nose and you breathe deep into the belly rather than high into the chest, you, one, start to breathe in nitric oxide, as we spoke about. So you open up the blood pathways, you've got better blood flow. And you also start to take in oxygen better, up to 20% better, because you're breathing ideally deep into the lungs, and the lowest parts of your lungs take in more oxygen than the higher parts of your lungs. So by doing that, you can improve your efficiency, and by continuing to breathe through the nose only and pushing the capacity of nasal breathing up, you can run faster for longer, recover quicker, have less pain after running, recover quicker after running. All those different types of things will make a huge difference by improving your nasal breathing capacity. So once you start, it will slow things down, but once you get back up to, let's say you can run a 5k in, for example, 21 minutes, right? Breathing as you are. If you step back and train nasal breathing and then run that same pace, because you can now do it all nasal, you'll use far less energy and you'll recover far quicker afterwards by doing it all through the nose and nose-mouth, because the gases are exchanged correctly.
Okay. So is it just to do with like the nitrogen levels? Is that the whole benefit of nasal breathing? Or is like what causes all these benefits that you're saying? Because like at the end of the day, like in my head, air's air. Like as like ignorant as that sounds.
So it's saying air's air is like saying food's food, right? It's to a degree the same thing. So what we take into our body, we have to work with, right? And the whole idea of us breathing a certain way is once air goes into our body, it's made up of different gases. Our body has to take apart the gases, do things with the gases, put them in the right places, use them correctly. Very much like putting different types of fuel in a car, right? So the type of fuel that goes in the car decides how fast it goes, how long it goes, how efficient the car is. Similar with the food, exactly the same with air. So let's say, one of the number one important parts of breathing this way is you need oxygen, of course, in the muscles for them to be able to work. For the oxygen to be released into the blood, you need to have higher levels of CO2 in the body that allows the oxygen to release its binding from the blood to go into the muscles. If you don't get that, the muscles just don't work, because there's oxygen in the body but not in the muscles. So if you have a low CO2 tolerance, what that means is as your CO2 starts to rise in the body, because you're creating CO2 from exercise, if you can't hold high levels of CO2 in your body, you feel very out of breath, and then you stop being able to perform, right? Because your tolerance is just almost zero. That's how you'll see a lot of people they're out of breath a lot, out of breath walking up the stairs, because as soon as their CO2 levels rise slightly, they start to breathe through the mouth and panic breathe. That's also how anxiety attacks and panic attacks can happen, because they'll start to have this panic from CO2 rising. So by practicing nasal breathing in specific ways, you can raise your tolerance to CO2 to allow more CO2 into the body, to allow the unbinding of the oxygen that's in your blood to go to your muscles, so you can use more efficiently the oxygen you have in your body to make the muscles perform. If you can't allow the CO2 in and tolerate it while it's in the body, the oxygen stays bound to the red blood cells. And then, of course, it doesn't go into the muscles, which means the muscles don't work. So we can't continue exercise. So that's it on a very basic level. But it's the way you breathe and how you breathe makes those gases do those certain things.
No, it's really interesting, and I don't think enough people have put thought into it, because it's just something you take for granted at the end of the day. It's like, well, my heart's beating, so like it's going to beat how it needs to do this job. Like my breathing's just going to be happening because it's just doing its job. But like you're saying, like there's doing this job and there's doing this job properly, and like you need to control one.
And look, the thing with that is, we spoke about this earlier before we started, but there are people looking for an edge, right? The people are always looking for this biohacking edge, and they're trying all these different things. They're trying cold therapy, they're trying different supplements, they're trying fasting and all these crazy things. And we should just go back to the most basic of things. Eat real foods, actual real foods, ones that existed 200, 300, 400 years ago, real foods. Drink as clean a water as you possibly can, that ideally doesn't come from your tap, is filtered or is from spring, those types of things. Eat a good amount so you've got the right amount of energy in the body, and then breathe clean air, and breathe clean air in the way the body wants to. One of the main reasons we aren't doing that is, one, everyone's overwhelmed with tons of different information, but also we live, so people argue with me usually when I say this. People think that this is the easiest time to be alive, and I completely disagree. When I was in Afghan, I miss how simple that was. I miss how simple it was to be in that place. If anyone's ever gone camping for an extended amount of time, it becomes easy because things are nice and the nervous system is settled and people get happier. Even if you're kind of out in the cold, it's a very simple way to live. Right now we're bombarded by Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and TV and Wi-Fi and 5G and 4G and car horns and funky foods and bosses and emails and all these different things, and that has an effect on our nervous system all of the time. It's always fired up, and when the nervous system's fired up, we breathe differently. We breathe high into the chest, we breathe through the mouth, and we end up living this life of consistent high levels of stress. And that's where we talk about the breath being the first thing to turn all of that back down, because these minor changes to our day is stressing everybody out. And people think it's the easiest time to be alive, but when the numbers show that we have more stressed, sick, depressed people than ever before, the data shows it's the hardest time ever to be alive, because we are under attack from every direction in micro ways that no one's paying attention to. Yeah. Because they don't see it as an attack, they see it as comfort. People understand that a bear or a tiger or a speeding car or a gun, they're dangerous, but nobody will believe, they just will not believe that Facebook, Instagram, the TV, the news, your food, your water are micro attacks on the body in a way to control you for extra profits or whatever they are doing it for. And all of those things added up, whether sinister or not, they still exist, and they add up to people ending up in this dysfunctional breath pattern that causes consistent stress. And that's the first way to start turning it all back down, is just breathe right.
Yeah. See, I agree with you about the whole, this is like you're saying, the most stressful time to be alive. But I've always put it down to Have you heard of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs? It's like, well, we've got the safety aspect down, like with living in houses, and then we've got like our food and our water and everything so easily available. And then I've always seen it as the higher up you get, the more stressed you are. And this has been a reflection of my life, because like 2020 I was made homeless, and for me, like you're saying, like that was a stress-free time almost, because it's like I now don't have to worry about bills. I eventually was living out I was in the fire service. I was staying on the fire station, and I was just, that was all I was doing. Like, it was in the middle of a pandemic. You can't do anything else anyway. And I was like, well, I'm homeless. I'm living in the fire station. All I can do is work. And yes, it's stressful work. Like, same with you in the military. It's like you're going into these high stress environments, but it's simple because you've got this task, you do the task, and then you get a result. And it's just, right, I can just tick by, and I'm just concerned, like, if I do something wrong, it's my safety. Like, you're pretty much at that bottom level of, like, I'm trying to survive here. And like you were saying, extended periods of camping, it's just that survival. You're just focused on survival. Whereas the higher up you get, like if you're reaching the self-actualization, like what's the highest version of myself, that's when things become more and more stressful, because it's like, well, I've got to reach this pinnacle. Like everything else is covered. Like, what more can I be doing? And that's when people get in their own heads, and it's like, I have to do more. Like, I have to be working more. I'm not earning enough. Whereas like even now, me running my business, I'm like, how can I get more out of this business? What more impact can I have on people? How can I make this more successful? And then I think back to 4 years ago, and I was like, I had no idea I'd be in this position 4 years ago. Like, I'm now talking to some fascinating people. I'm helping people on a daily basis. And 4 years ago, I was sleeping on a park bench, and it's like, I feel more stressed now than I did then. And it's, yeah, that's how I've always seen it.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a couple of things. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a very basic version, I think, of what is a test done a long time ago, right? I don't know the date, so I won't make it up. But it was certainly done in a time where we don't have the stresses we have now. And when we talk about the lowest level, right, which is going to be food, water, safety, etc., of the pyramid, the thing that's not put into that, and that I suppose wasn't tested because things didn't exist, is that if we've got food and we've got safety and we've got shelter, right, that's the basics of what we believe safety to be, because that's what it was at a certain point. If your nervous system's firing up all day long and it is scared shitless because of bills, because of constant war on the TV and economic breakdowns, and the food is making you sick, and all these different things, and the way people eat, and they're constantly vaping all day long and having bad foods and 8 coffees a day, and the nervous system's fired up to this way of it, the nervous system doesn't feel safe. No amount of shelter, water or food is going to make a person feel safe, because their nervous system's telling them they aren't. So that idea of self-actualization and moving up the pyramid becomes impossible for anybody when the body sits in a state of fear that it can't even understand. It's why we have people saying, why is my life is great, but I feel depressed. I understand my family love me, I've got a good job, I've got a home, I've got, pets and people that love me, and everything's fine, but I feel depressed and I don't know why. And it's because the nervous system is so out of whack that all the things we called safety aren't enough. Not in a world where we're attacked by invisible things that we are meant to not understand, to keep people in this controlled state to continue. And again, I'm not saying that these people are, let's say Facebook, for example, it's this scrolling, right? Instagram, consistent scrolling. I'm not saying they're doing it for nefarious reasons, but that's their business model. Scroll because it makes me money. Now, when it's just consistent scrolling, they make tons of money, and people's minds are just more, dopamine, and the nervous system never stops. So there's a slightly newer version of that study. It's almost completely different, but matches up to the idea. It's called Spiral Dynamics by a guy called Dr. Claire Graves. And he talks about the emergent systems of the mind, that essentially there are parts of the mind that you have to go through as almost like an emergence. Some people call it spiritual, some people call it physical. But essentially, the lowest level of that, say level 1, is us just being amoeba. And it goes to level 2, level 3, 4, 5, 6. Most of the world right now is at about a 6-ish. And what a 6 means is that you'll have these activist types who want to save the world, but they're saving it from a me point of view. So it's why they're pointing the fingers at everybody else. The world's terrible and it's your fault. Right, so the level 4 is a very military level, right? So we think in this hierarchical level of who's in charge. 5 is a very business level, so this is where we start to create cities and businesses and money and look after those types of things. That's what happens in the mind. 6 then becomes, we've got the safety and the comfort of all the businesses and all the money and what's been provided. And then it becomes almost an egalitarian idea of, let's save the world, but it's from a me point of view. Now, once people start moving on a collective level up to level 7, that's a save the world from an us point of view. So what this explains, by the way, is you can be knocked down quite easily through mental attacks into a level 3 or 2, which is fear-based. So even if you are generally like a level 4, 5 or 6 and you're very well put together, little things can knock you down into these ideas and keep you scared all of the time. Even if you're a very smart person, you're very very evolved in that sense, small amounts of fear can put you on those lower levels, and so you don't even care about self-actualization and those types of things. But it's a much more in-depth study on the mind and like the emergent ideas of mind and how to move people up and down that scale.
Yeah. I'm definitely going to look into that because that sounds fascinating.
It is. You won't see the world the same again. It's one of the reasons. It's one of the reasons. In fact, they talk about how controversial topic, of course, but immigration, right? If you go to another country where the country, in a sense, on the whole, is at, let's say, a 3, because they live in a country where they don't have the comforts we do. Perhaps there's war, perhaps there's unrest, and they are at a level 3. Now, if you pick those people up, right, and you just drop them in a country that's a level 4, 5, or 6, for the most part, like we are, then those people are at a level 3 and they can't just jump to 4, 5, or 6 and join in. It's impossible. They have to go through certain things in the mind in order to become and feel safe, to have these emergent systems to move up to safety and to this egalitarian idea. So they are level maybe 2s and 3s living in systems of 4s, 5s and 6s. And so what they'll do is they'll still act like they would do where they are, because those emergent systems in the mind haven't had time to switch. That's not for everybody, right? Because some people will act differently. But when we do that, in fact, Claire Graves was given the task to help South Africa to move through apartheid at one point. So saying, how do we have these people stop fighting each other, right? Because you understand the mind. And one of the parts he talked about is when they put a lot of copper phone systems into Africa at a certain time, lots of people in the area, even though the phone systems, of course, and the wires would help businesses, would help people grow and to scale the country, people just stole the copper because they were in this fear mode of, I better have that, it's mine, not thinking far enough ahead of, this is for us and this is how we do things. People stole the copper and people treated it as, I better have this for me and my family, and the hell with everybody else. And I believe that's kind of where we are across the world, of everyone's looking after themselves because everyone's nervous systems are out of whack and they're aiming for this self-actualization because Instagram says they should, but they're terrified all of the time through dysregulated nervous systems that are making them do things they probably wouldn't do if they felt okay.
Yeah. I feel like that really sums up or like explains the reasoning why behind all this motivational stuff is coming out on Instagram. And it's like, you look at like the David Goggins, you look at like Chris Willocks, and like all these clips of these famous people being like, this is how you become successful. And in your mind, you're thinking like, yeah, I just need to do this to become successful. I need to just work hard and blah, 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 train this much, do this, whatever it may be. But then there's no action taken because, like you're saying, they're still stuck in this fear mode and they're looking at Instagram being like, well, I want to be up there because that's what Instagram's telling me I need to be doing, but they can't make the steps to do it because they're not at that level yet.
Yeah, and I think there's a few levels to that, and this is where breathwork for me comes in the most. is studies were shown. There's a book called Power versus Force, and it talks about the I suppose the frequency levels of ways of feeling, right? And the lowest level I think was fear, and the highest level was love, right? So it's like a vibrational thought pattern. So they can test the way the mind works, and those different thought patterns have a vibrational level, which in itself is a spiritual idea, right? So we turned it into a scientific idea, but that in itself, the highest vibration is love. It's what yogis talked about for 5,000 years. But what we know now to be true is that actual highest level of existence is authenticity over love, which means we've got people thinking that success is what somebody else does, and they're trying to have someone else's version of success, and maybe being scared they can't make it, and all these other different ideas. And it turns out really that just by being authentic, that is as high as you can possibly be. It's the best way to exist. And something I talk about in a lot of my breathwork sessions now, because it blew my mind when I heard this, is we always thought that the race for to be born was like a literal race between sperm, right? We thought there's an egg, survival of the fittest, whoever swims the fastest gets there, right? That's what everyone always thought, fastest swimmers. And it's not the case. What they've found recently is that the egg puts out a certain frequency to tell one sperm to swim faster, tells the rest to slow down, and even if other sperm make it there first, it will not let any of them in apart from that one. Which means, like it or not, and by who you can decide, but you've been chosen to be here. You've been chosen by either the egg for that one sperm, or you can say it was God decided that it's you that needs to be here at this time, or it was the mother that said, I want that part of this guy, that's the one. But for whatever reason, I believe that's why authenticity is the highest vibration, and what would keep us away from fear and living this life is that something in the universe has chosen us to be here right now amongst these people, and there's only one version of us. Everything else outside of yourself is a lie. So by doing anything else that other people want, or that you think you should be doing, all of it is a lie. So to be fully authentic because you were chosen to be here now by whatever forces, I think is the fastest way to get away from fear, to move everything forward, and to make sure we don't continue to go down this awful path that we seem to be falling down at the moment in society.
Yeah, I'd heard about that study with the sperm and everything, but the way you've interpreted it it's incredible, to be honest. Like, that has like taken me back a bit. The thought that there's that like selection of us to be here at this moment in time, it's a very powerful thought, and I think that can help a lot of people if they believe that.
I agree, and the way I like to see it is, I don't think it matters if you're spiritual or if you're into the Big Bang, right, or you're into evolution, or you don't believe in evolution or the Big Bang, whatever way that goes, right, it doesn't matter. The fact is, something somehow somewhere chose you to be here, and it might be a purely mathematical thing, right? Fine. Even if that's the case, the maths say be you. If it was God, the God says, I need you right now. If it's the mother said, you are the best version of your father. Everything about your father, you are the best version, so do something with that. And we will make these two people into the best version you could possibly be. The best for now, at least, right? Not necessarily the physically the strongest, but the best for right now. And to me, that's profound just in itself. That it's not the fastest swimmer, it's not luck. It's that there's a purpose for everybody and everything, and nature doesn't ever get it wrong. Never. Yeah. The only time we get it wrong is when we become too human and try to override nature. So I think in order for us to, I was thinking on the way here, actually, in the car, something popped in my head. Like, I was listening to a lady called Kai Tempest. She's a poet, and in one of her tracks, she was talking about, she keeps counting up 7.1 billion humans, 7.2 billion humans, and it just popped in my head of, people think that's too many people, right? But no one says there's too many cows or too many flies or too many dogs. It's not that there's too many, it's that we're doing it wrong, right? So you could double the amount of people. If we lived differently, we'd be fine. And I think that's the idea, right? Is that we're just doing it wrong. It's just suboptimal for what we could be. I think if we just joined back into nature and we allowed ourselves to assimilate rather than try and subvert the will of nature that's got it perfect up until this point, then we'd continue that path of perfection rather than tearing it all apart.
Yeah. Bringing it back to breathwork then, how can we use breathwork to get us to that point of like bringing ourselves back to purpose almost?
That's a good question. I suppose it's this, to a degree, it's the same answer to where do I start with breathwork. It's consciousness, it's paying attention. When we start breath, and we start breathwork for, I say, conscious breathing, we go very deep into ourselves. In that moment, each breath is the moment. That's all there is happening right now. So we forget the past, we forget the future. And especially with conscious connected breathing, it turns off a part of the brain called the default mode network, which deals with the ego. You cannot have an ego and idea of self if there's past and future. So when we turn that off, we become very authentic on who we are in that moment. And people have profound realizations about who they are, what they should do, why they're here, and make very big decisions quickly. I've had people walk out of my breathwork sessions, start a business, end a business, ask someone to marry them, end their marriage, end the relationship, all these different things, because they've realized this is my actual life and how it should be going. So breathwork wise, I think if we just breathe more consciously, pay more attention to what's going on inside, realize who we actually are and what we're here for, then that gives us that direction and purpose and allows the Maslow's hierarchy of needs to be stacked correctly, so we can aim towards self-actualization without fear, and just be more accurate in who we are and what we're supposed to do as people. And I'm not saying everyone has this amazing purpose, by the way. People love to come on Instagram and say everyone's got this fantastic purpose, you're here to change the world. We're not all here for that. We're all here to experience it just as we are. Some people are meant to be Will Smiths and presidents and prime ministers and fantastic poets and chefs. Some of us are here just to experience it exactly as we are with the people that we have. But let's do that right and do it properly and do it the best way we possibly can, because none of those jobs is better than any other. Just to do yourself the way you should, in the nicest way possible, to affect those around us. And I think breathwork gets us there quicker than any other practice.
Yeah. How would you get someone to that point through breathwork? Like, what would be the protocol almost? Like, is there a set thing that you take them through where it's like, I can see that your nervous system's firing like crazy, this is what we're going to do to just bring you back down? Is there like a set way, or is it different for different people? Or
yeah, it's different for different people, but it's not crazily different for everyone. There's always going to be nuances on what's the best thing for now. For the most part, most people, as long as they don't have major heart issues, brain issues, epilepsy, those types of things, most people can start conscious connected breathwork with guidance, almost everybody. And it's as long as the practitioner is safe that is taking it through, the facilitator. That's the place I always like to start because it's the most profound. As we spoke about earlier, if we started with some of the more simple practices, it takes a long time to get people to really feel any major changes in the body. Starting for me with conscious connected breathwork, which are the deeper breaths, often through the mouth, by the way, which sounds counterintuitive, but the idea is that we want to turn on the fight or flight systems. We want to kind of light the body up a little bit. It's deep breathing into the belly through the mouth. And that switches off a lot of the ego and just drives people towards purpose and what they want. Those sessions for about 45 to 60 minutes are usually enough to allow people to give them direction about whatever happens next. I've had people walk in and want to get over breakups or deaths, and they've walked out saying, my body was telling me I need to eat more broccoli, look after myself, go to the gym, drink more water, and sleep better. Because their body was telling them, none of this stuff matters if you're sick. So they had to go away and do that first before they could deal with things. So I would, more often than not, after a kind of chat with someone, start there, because it drives them very deep into themselves, and they'll know the answers better than I do.
I always see like a strong link between breathwork and cold water therapy, and this seems to be for the same reasoning, of like you're trying to reach, like we're talking about now, that state of consciousness, that state of this brings my body to awareness. Do you think that there's a link because obviously the cold water affects your breathing, or is it just like I could call it the Wim Hof effect, where it's like he's done these two things and now people just associate them together?
A bit of both. So actually, if you think of them very similar, right, is that when you jump in the cold water, when you're there for long enough, it starts to pull some of the blood away from your brain to protect organs, right? That's one of the number one things. So it starts to come away from your fingers and your toes, and it all comes in to the centre. So if you've sat in the ice bath for long enough, your mind slows down and chills out, and you think about now. One of the first places that the blood will come away from are the more mammalian and human parts of the brain, because it's the least needed. It's the logic centres which deal with ego and those types of things. So in the cold, it does very similar to breath work. But there's also two counterintuitive things with the breath, right? The reason we want to go into the cold is to spark fight or flight systems, to allow our nervous system to feel a certain thing and get used to these extra stresses. When we breathe in a certain way so that we aren't stressed, what we end up doing to a degree is not feeling so much of the stress, so the water doesn't affect us the same. But also we are training our bodies to allow us to control our stress levels, if that makes sense. So they're linked because they're both stressors. In Wim Hof's course, for example, he talks about hormesis, which is driving the body to a positive level of stress that allows you to change in positive ways. So you don't want to go so far that you break. You don't want so much stress in the body that you break, but you want enough to affect the body to be able to positively stress itself. And as you said, when you jump in the ice, the breath changes as well. So controlling the two allows you to stay in the ice longer and to alleviate stress, so you feel more in charge, really.
Yeah. With Wim Hof, I'm just using him as an example because obviously he's the person that's brought breathwork to light almost. He's got like a set protocol for breathing before ice baths and stuff. Is there like a certain way that it's like, right, this is how you get the most out of the ice bath through your breathing, or is it just like you just need to control it?
It's one of those questions that's really simple and really detailed again. It depends what you want from the ice bath, right? So if you want to be able to stay in for a long time, right, if you want to stay in the ice bath for a long time for the numbers, or to be able to handle the cold, then you're going to want to be able to keep the body warm. You're going to be able to want to stay kind of in your mind and out of the body, and you're going to want lots of blood flow, right? So that you are in the state where you're feeling kind of nice and warm. So you start to burn the brown fat in the body, keep the body warm. If you want to be in there for a long time, then of course you need to breathe nice and heavy before you go in and get into that state. Now you can't do that in the cold water. People have done that and died the past couple of years, which is why Wim Hof's being sued for a lot of money right now. But if you want to stay nice and calm in the cold water and have a different effect of staying in for different reasons, then you want to slow the breath down. So when I get in, the first thing I do is breathe out, because as we spoke about at the beginning of the podcast, the first thing you might do, you'll see people go, and they'll breathe this way. It's all in. That when you breathe in, the heart rate goes up. When you breathe out, the heart rate goes down. So people get high-chested and breathe into the mouth because they want the heart rate to go up, because the body's saying warm up so that you don't die in the cold water. Now, if you breathe out through the nose slowly as you get in, you're telling the nervous system it's okay to be in the cold. So when I get in, I want to make sure my nervous system is okay, so that I don't have these, I'm trying to train it to not get anxious through fear. So rather than train the physical side of things of stay in the water, I'm training my nervous system to be okay with what is potentially scary things. So I'm doing the opposite of what it's trying to do to make me fight or flight and fight through the cold water. I'm saying you're actually safe in the water. So I breathe out and slowly through the nose rather than the opposite of what it makes you do. So it does depend on what you want. So sorry, that's a bit of a, neither here or there answer. But you have to always think about what the outcome wants to be. And for me, everything should go back to the nervous system. If you can control your nervous system, you can control everything, because that's what we seem to be making all our decisions on in this strange, fearful world we're in.
Yeah. I always find when I go in the cold water, something I've started doing is just going head it under first thing. Yeah. But I don't just like go head under and then come up, because then I do have that panic, like, what am I doing? Like, why have I just done that? Yeah. So I try and stay under the water and hold my breath. And then like after like 10, 15 seconds, I come up. I still have a bit panicked breathing because I don't really think about it. But I feel like a lot less stressed than when I just dip and come back out. Yeah. Like, what's the causing of that? Is that like a good way to do it, would you say? Or is it like...
Yeah, if it works. So most people have more fear of going in the cold water than actually being in the cold water themselves. So the anxiety is, I don't want to go in, which is why they'll do toes, then ankles, then knees, then thigh. And they spend the whole time in this fearful state of, what about the next part of my body? What about the next part of my body? What will it feel like on the hips? What will it feel like on the belly? And there's this constant kind of, teetering into the sea almost. When you jump in, you'll just go and just get the whole thing done. Eat the frog, do the thing straight away. And you're letting your body know that you take charge of things, and that's the whole thing done. There's nothing to be afraid of because I'm already wet. One of my sergeants in the Marines used to say there's nothing worse than a dry Marine, in the sense that you're too scared to get wet. Like, the guys don't want to jump in puddles and be in the rain, so they kind of shy away from things a little bit. So the first thing you do is go get in the puddle. You did no need to be wet, but once you're wet, everything's fine. It doesn't get any worse than that. And that's what you're doing for yourself. You're just saying, let's make this as bad as it can possibly be. I'll go right under, I'll hold it, I'll let my body know I'm fine. When I come out, it gets better because my head's out of the water, I'm actually safe. So if that works for you, it's fine. That's how I like to do it. Yeah. You just jump in, act like it's totally fine. My breath doesn't change in the slightest. I just go in, sit there and just stay there.
Yeah. I think that what you were saying about the dry marine thing, that is exactly what I see on ultras. Yeah. Like, when you're doing an ultra run and it's like, at some point you're going to have to go through a bog or something, otherwise it's not a proper ultra in my mind. Yeah. So yeah, like, you just got to get in that first puddle. And I caught myself doing it when I did mine on the weekend, and I was like, oh yeah, try and dodge this puddle, try and dodge that. Yeah. And I knew that, like, at a certain point in the race, because I'd checked out the course because it was around here, there's just this bog where it's like there's a puddle and it's usually about shin height, and if you try and go round it, you're in like a knee-deep bog, if not worse. And I knew that was coming up, and I'm like, why am I even bothering trying to avoid these like little puddles? Like, and then I just started running through them, and you can see some people are like, it's their first ultra, and they're like, why is he just running through the puddles? And then you see people that have done ultras, they're like, yeah, get it done.
Yeah, and I think, even things like that is such a metaphor for so many things. The metaphor is, it's coming either way. Like, just do it. Just get it over and done with. Rip the plaster off. If it's coming, just do it now. Why have the fear in between now and the time it's happening? And I think things like that you can just transfer into life in anything. If you know you've got to go through the pain, do it now. Get it done early. Get out of the way, and dunk your whole head under, and you're fine.
Yeah. It's I can't think who said it now, but it's like, someone just says it's going to be okay, because you're so caught up in your head of like, oh, it's not going to be okay, and then it carries on to be like, and if it's not going to be okay, then that's okay, because you can just deal with it when you get there. Yeah. And it's like, this pointless worrying about whether it's going to be okay or not. Like, there might be like, you might have been called to a meeting with your manager on Friday, and you've spent the whole week like, what's going to happen in this meeting, man? Am I going to lose my job? And like, you spend more time stressing about it, and then you might get there and they might be like, oh, you're getting a promotion. But you've spent the whole week just stressed, like we're saying, in that fight or flight, like, oh my God, what's going to happen? When really you could just be like, oh, okay, I've got this thing. Like, I'll worry about it when I get there. Yeah. And you might get there and you might get fired. Like, that might be what's happening. I don't know. But then you can't change it. Why stress about it beforehand?
Yeah. And it makes sense. It's just that thing, right? Of if you walked in, they went, you're fired, get out, and it took 10 seconds, right? then why ruin your whole week for it? And again, it's that idea of maybe getting into the ice bath, and it's where you'll see people breathe funny for a whole week. You can look at some people and you can just say something wrong with you, like what's going on, ask them questions because their breath is funny. You can see people in these stress states, and it's that exact reason. They'll think something's coming on the Friday, and they'll start breathing high-chested and through the mouth for a whole week, and they'll spend the whole week in a poor nervous system state. And again, that's why people get sick. It's why they get ill. It's why they don't feel great about themselves, put weight on. All these different things happen from thinking about a future that they've made up.
Yeah.
And that's all it is. The future can be nothing more than you making it up in the moment. It can't be, because even if you believe it's going to happen, you just never know. Yeah. And the past is actually the same, by the way. You can't ever prove anything from the past, right? At all. We can talk about it, but you can't prove too much, really. They might say, well, we can prove things because the table's here, so someone must have made it. And you can say that with the whole physical idea of things, right? But if you want to get real conceptual, you can go, well, you can't actually prove it just because it's here, because we don't even know we're here, right? So it becomes this weird thing of just be now, just live here, and just enjoy what it is right now.
Yeah. Taking it back to, because you brought up about stressed and how people being stressed changes their breathing, and we've been talking a lot about like being conscious of your breathing. Something that I've noticed within myself is when I get stressed, I'll find throughout like the period of like a day, a week or whatever, there's periods where I'll catch myself holding my breath, and I'll just be there like, and then I have to like almost remind myself to breathe. And like I'm conscious of that, and I've noticed myself, like especially this past week, I've done it quite a lot. I've caught myself holding my breath, and I'm like, right, I know I'm doing that. I know that it's because I've got like all this stuff going on, but then what can I do about it? Like, I'm conscious of it now. Like, where do I go from there? What's the step to be like, right, I need to change this?
Sure. So you've started first of all by understanding it and knowing it's happening. The more you do it, the closer to the time it's happening you'll realise it. So sometimes you might hold your breath for say 30 seconds and realise on the 30th second. The more you do it, you'll start to realise at 25 seconds, 20 seconds, 10 seconds. The other point is that happens usually due to nervous system, I won't say failure, but dysfunctions or breathing dysfunctions that lead up to the breath hold. So by training your breath through the day, so maybe take even just 2 or 3 minutes, 4 or 5 times a day, to breathe through the nose, say in for 4 and out for 4, and pay attention to how that makes you feel, that will balance the nervous system so you'll stop holding your breath at some point. The reason you hold your breath is because your nervous system's out of whack anyway, and you're a little tight at the time. So if you can just train yourself to bring the nervous system back down, that'll just stop happening.
Yeah. Is there a set protocol to follow? I know I keep asking these questions, but I like actionable things. Yeah, like that's what I want to give the listeners.
Sure. Okay, cool. So so a great thing to start on, the most basic thing a person can possibly do, is to breathe in through the nose and out through the nose, deeply into the belly, and to breathe, say, in for 4 seconds and out for 4 seconds. Do it for 2 minutes, do it for 5 minutes, do it for 20 minutes, whatever you can do. Even if it's just a minute, just feel how that feels, and just do it a number of times a day. Start with once a day, twice a day. Yeah. I've given that to people, for example, in their 70s. He thought he had long COVID, could barely stand up, stopped liking life, stopped eating, and within 2 weeks he was up again, being a mechanic on his car again, eating 2-3 meals a day, cleaning the windows, out for a walk first thing. And it was just from simple practice, like 4 in, 4 out. He was doing it 4 in, 4 out, 3 times a day for 5 minutes. And that just slowed his nervous system back down to get him back into place. So that's a very simple practice. Ideally, if you could, you should be breathing 4 in, 4 out, or 5 in, 5 out for a whole day through the nose. So the more you can extend those practices and come back to that breath, for example, when you notice that you're holding your breath, take it straight back to nasal breathing for say 5 in, 5 out for as long as you can possibly do it for while you're doing other things. And the more you can do that, the better it becomes.
Yeah. So is it a case of starting off doing it like consciously, and you have to put like a lot of thought into it? It almost feels like a lot of effort thinking about, right, I'm going to control my breathing at first. I can imagine it's best to do it when you're not doing other things, just like, let's get used to this, and then trying to build it into other things. Is it a case that if you do it enough, that just becomes your natural breathing pattern?
Yes. Same with everything, right? It becomes unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and then unconscious competence. So the more we do things, the more it transfers to the unconscious mind. And those breaths unchecked, if you think about it the reverse way, in fact, because the breath has been unchecked and become unconscious, it's become dysfunctional, and you're breathing a certain way because you practiced it unconsciously over time. Yeah. So if you practice it consciously for an amount of time until it becomes, it kind of embeds itself in the nervous system, so the body starts to remember it, you'll just start to breathe that way. Similar to walking and driving, right? You drive now without thinking about it, you walk without thinking about it, the breath will do the exact same thing.
Okay. What would you say then is like the biggest benefit from breath work? Because we've covered like so many things, from sports performance to like spirituality to like all the way up to self-actualization
and somehow economics and things, which is weird. Honestly, I'd say the biggest in where we are in the world right now, and altogether, I think the biggest thing that breathwork can change for a person is their consciousness, and that I don't necessarily mean the spiritual version of, being a guru or that type of thing. I just mean just paying more attention, just being here, just being conscious and present about what's going on. If we don't have that, we're not living. The further we move from consciousness and from awareness of what we do in every moment, the more autonomous we are, the more automatic we are, the more machine-like we are, and essentially the less we live. If a person go from the start of their life to the end of their life and think about nothing they do, it's not a life. It's just a set of processes that happened. So I believe for everybody, the more they can become present about what they do and who they are and why they're doing it, that to me is the deepest version of living. And things will just happen in their lives. They'll understand why they're eating bad food, or they feel terrible, or they can't get over the breakup, or they can't get their promotion at work. They'll understand because they're present in every moment, and they'll just start to fix their lives quicker because they're paying attention, rather than just going to the next thing because it feels like they should.
Yeah. What other areas do you think breathwork can help that we haven't covered today? Is there anything that you feel like we've missed out that you think is really important about breathwork?
Good question. Yes, and I suppose I'll go to the spiritual point of that then, because it's why I got into it. Is we haven't spoken about this today, but there have been completely unexplainable happenings in my breathwork sessions that I'll never be able to explain. I'm not sure if anyone else can. When people breathe in a certain way in a room together, their consciousness seems to connect somehow. I've had people in my sessions have the exact same experience that have never met each other. One of the experiences I had was on the session, and I'll get to why this is important now. On the session, it was the anniversary of a girl's baby's death. During her session, when we spoke about things at the end, she said that she had the opportunity during the breathwork session to hold her baby, communicate with the baby, and feel love from her baby. And she was like, I was with my baby, not I felt like I was with my baby was here. The girl across from her who never met her burst into tears and said, through the whole session in my breathwork, I could see a baby floating above you in white light. So those people had never met. She had her baby with her in her experience. The girl who had never met her could see the girl's baby somehow. And I say that to say, I believe that just the physical world it's not everything. I believe there are deeper things that we're here for, places we should connect, and a reason that we are here beyond physical tables and money and cameras and microphones and cars and whatever else. I believe we're more than that, and I think if we allowed ourselves to go deeper into those things, I think we'd move far faster in a better direction than we currently are, because we're anchored too much in solid things rather than, I suppose, ethereal currently non-measurable ways of living.
Yeah. How do you think breathwork brings that spirituality about? Like,
Do you know, I don't know, and honestly, we can talk about certain ways of. People like to say it raises your vibration, right? People like to say that it switches off the ego, which it does. It switches off the ego so that we can become more now and more present. Some people will say that they're illusions, right? And that we are having hallucinations, right? Because we've got too much oxygen in the brain. I actually don't care personally how we get there. I don't care why it is, as long as it's safe, which it is, and we can have these experiences that profoundly change the way we see the world, then that's all that matters, because that's what it did for me. I came from literally wanting to be an Afghan because I enjoyed the whole process, to fully understanding that nobody is really a good guy or a bad guy in those places, and that if we're killing people, it's wrong. And I came from that to that very quickly. So I don't know, and I won't pretend to know, because if you've and come and do one when you've had the experience, it's you can measure people all you like and talk about the gases and things. I don't think that's it. So again, I don't know, but you have to feel it to understand it, and once you do, it's very hard to deny that those other places and other ways of living don't exist.
yeah, it's fascinating to me because I've not had an experience like that, and it's almost hard to believe when you, like you're saying, like you haven't been through it, but seeing like the passion and everything that you're talking with, and also understanding, like what helps me is you understand the science of it. And it's like you've gone through this whole process, like you said, where from leaving the military, you've tried some breath work, and then it's like, well, I don't understand this. How can I understand more? And you've tried to get that understanding yourself, and you clearly have, because you've obviously spent hours researching and going on courses and learning about this and practicing it yourself. So you know the science of it, you know the benefits, but to you it seems like more than that. Like there's way more to breathing than, right, this is sports performance breathing, this is what you do, this is how we're going to improve your mental health, decrease your stress, whatever it is. For you it seems like there's more there that we just aren't tapping into.
Way more. And as strange as it sounds, that the reason, the number one reason I started to understand that was having night vision goggles on in the Marines. I looked up and I could see things that I could not because it was dark, but different light spectrums, right? And I didn't look at it, oh, this is cool, in a physical sense. I thought, how much can't I see? Because that's a small spectrum. How much can't I hear? How much can't I feel? How much of this is actual reality? And when you do breath work in certain ways, it'll put you in places where you think all that stuff that I've just experienced was completely out of the realm of possibility when I only paid attention to this. And there are studies now where they are starting to map this other side, right? So they're giving people long DMT or psilocybin trips, and these people are staying under in these trips for 6, 7, 8 hours at a time, and they're coming back with maps. They're drawing what's on the other side, and they're handing the maps to other people, and they're going and walking around the map. So this other place we go, this other experience we have, it's an actual place, it's a real thing. Nobody knows how or why, but like I said, I've tried to explain it to people. There aren't words for it. You have to do it. You've got to practice it. You've got to go and be there, and then try and explain it yourself or whatever you want to do with it. But it's impossible to explain it without having done it.
Yeah. Some other side of it that I'm really interested in is you've got like all the old yogis and monks and like almost the original sources of breath work. And I've heard all these stories of like monks that will go and sit in the snow, and just by breathing there's a circle around them of melted snow, and you can see like the ground beneath them when there's like inches of snow everywhere else. And just the sort of levels you can get your body to through breath work, whether that's physically, spiritually, whatever the causes may be, like how accurate do you think that is? Do you think some of that is like hyperbole, or do you think it's all...
No, I think it's all real. If you ever listen to Terrence Howard on Joe Rogan, he talks about how physical reality to a degree is everything's made of the same stuff. It's just a different resonance. So we move through the periodic table by having things resonate at different frequencies, essentially. So if we attach that to the yogic and almost Buddhist idea that once we start to vibrate higher and become more spiritual, we turn into what they call light beings, right? They say in Buddhism when someone transcends, they almost disappear into light. I believe a part of that is true, that when they vibrate higher, when they become something more, when they tap into or out of this lower level frequency of the physical world, that because the human body does emit light at all times, and they've shown also that when people are happier, when they're in certain ways, they actually emit more light. And it's by doing those things and tapping into those different levels of spirituality and resonance and frequency through breath, through meditation, that we can control how the body exists. And I think that creates heat and light and sound and other things, and I believe that's all perfectly real. And if you go into certain parts of quantum physics and match it to spirituality, they basically say it's true, but just don't quite agree on why or how.
I think there's a real overlap now between the spirituality of breathwork, or not just breathwork, but in general, and science, and the two are starting to marry up. Yeah. I think it's an exciting time to start contemplating these things, because even just like thinking about that stuff, like 5-10 years ago, you'd be called like crazy and a woo woo and all of that, and now it's becoming more accepted and people are more open to it. So I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, and I think the reason is that the nature has a way of balancing itself out. I believe we've gone so physical. I believe we've gone so almost dead in our minds and autonomous in a lot of ways, that I believe that existence itself is almost fighting back to say, if we're going to go that far into the physical side of things, then consciousness and humanity must fully understand the spirituality to balance everything out, because the universe has to have balance. So if you notice, the more we start pushing into technology and it's moving very fast, somehow the more spirituality is waking up as well. Spirituality is moving faster now than it has done in a very long time. It seems at the same pace that AI and other things are. People are waking up all over the world into different ideas of spirituality and breathwork and practices. I think because we're going too far this way, I think nature itself is saying we have to balance it out. So it's trying to wake up other parts of the universe to say we can't have it all balanced this way, because it has to be balanced out. So I believe we're doing this kind of tearing in the middle, which is why you've got so much division, as well. You've got people on one side and people on the other, and the spectrum is further apart now than it ever has been, I think.
Yeah. The way I like to end all of my podcasts is I like to ask the guest to set a challenge for the listeners for the week. So if you could set one challenge for the listeners this week, what would it be? Just go out, run 50k. It's easy, guys.
Through your nose. Okay, so I think a great challenge would be. I'll kind of give it two, because I believe these things are very linked. One is to spend at least 20 minutes a day, broken up all together, with your eyes closed, breathing in through the nose and out through the nose for 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. You can do 4 lots of 5, 5 lots of 4, 10 lots of 2, 1 lot of 20, whatever you want to do. Make it 30 minutes or 40 minutes if you want to. And when you do that, ideally do it every day for a week. And when you do that, just feel into yourself and how you feel in those moments, and how much more you feel like you can connect to others afterwards. And then do something with that. So do something with the fact you feel more connected to yourself by helping somebody else. So once you've done the breath work, and you've connected to yourself more deeply, you should understand other people's pains a bit more. So just pass it on, do something nice for someone every day for the 7 days straight after the breathwork.
Amazing. And then finishing up, where can people go to follow you, your breathwork, and how can they get onto one of these breathwork experiences with you?
So if they go to aware_breathwork on Instagram, that's where it's got tons of my videos, and the link tree, you can click in there and just book on any of them. I do them most Sundays, and the bigger sessions every couple of months in Skewin area in South Wales. So yeah, just go on there, message me on there, click on the links, book on, ask me a question, or just turn up. And you know, I don't do it for money, so if people are struggling, if they don't have the money, or they've got friends that have mental health issues or whatever, they just want to bring them along, just come down. I don't really care if people pay. There's nothing really.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time and all the information. I'm sure there's a lot for people to unpack in that.
Yeah. No worries. Thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
No worries. Thank you.